Hey friends, Catherine Korostoff here, and today I'd like to talk about how we do professional survey research. I'd like to talk about the entire process, start to finish. And one of the things that's really interesting to me, especially when I'm working with people who are newer to the market research and insights profession, is that they often want to jump right into questionnaire design. So they're getting assigned to one of their first survey research projects and they can't wait to design a questionnaire. I understand. It's very interesting to design questionnaires, to think about what your research objectives are and to really design an instrument that's going to meet those objectives. But if you're a market research and insights professional and you're responsible for managing the process, well, it's important to have realistic expectations about how many steps are in the actual process itself. So let me ask you a question. When you think about the survey research process based on your own experience or what you've heard about it, how many steps do you think there are in the survey research process? If you think about a project from start to finish, how many steps do you think there are? Okay, to some extent, the number of steps is going to define by how granular you define a step, right? But even if we look at a very high level of categories of steps, I would say that there are at least 11 steps in the survey research process. And 2 of those steps are highly iterative, meaning that you can get stuck on that step for quite a while you're getting input from your clients or stakeholders or subject matter experts or whoever you might be collaborating with on a given process. So let's go through the steps involved in professional research. Now, for those of you who may be listening to this on audio only, I'll put a link to the actual flowchart that I am sharing in the YouTube version of this conversation. So in a professional research project, and this is true for any type of professional research project, whether you're doing survey research or qualitative research, but our example today is on survey research, you are going to start with some form of kickoff. There has to be a point where you are officially kicking off the project. And typically that will be a meeting. Now, the extent to which that's going to be a highly formal or more of an informal meeting will obviously depend on the project. Typically, if you're talking about a project that's got a budget of $50,000 or more, you're going to have a fairly formal kickoff meeting. If it's a very small project, or if it's a project where you're going to be using an existing survey design, or maybe you're doing a second wave of a project that was already done previously, then it can likely be less formal. However, there's got to be some form of kickoff meeting. This is the place where you and either the clients or stakeholders or other collaborators need to make sure that everybody has absolute clarity about what the project is about and what the expectations are about how it's going to be delivered. And after the kickoff meeting, if you're the project manager, you're responsible for delivering some documentation. It's very important in professional research that we document the key decisions that were agreed to during a kickoff meeting, just to avoid any misunderstanding. And as experienced researchers know, sometimes you can be in a kickoff meeting and you think everybody's agreed to the objectives and the schedule and the types of deliverables, and then you find out afterwards that somebody actually misunderstood. Maybe because they were newer to research or have had different experiences. But even if you've had a great kickoff meeting, you have to put it in writing afterwards so that you can make sure that there won't be any disagreements or confusions or, frankly, missed opportunities to exceed expectations down the road. Now, the type of documentation is going to vary team to team. Some teams like to produce one document with everything in it. Some teams like to take a more granular approach and produce individual documents. So there's really 4 specific types of information that need to be documented, and you might choose to do that as 4 documents, or you might create one document that has all of the components. The first thing is to document the schedule. What is the schedule for the project? What are the milestones in that schedule? And most important, what are the dependencies? You always want to have a documented schedule in professional research so that it's very clear who is involved where. For example, maybe you're a market research department of one and you're primarily going to be doing the questionnaire design by yourself and a lot of the steps by yourself. However, you're still probably going to have dates where you're going to need input or approvals from maybe a subject matter expert or a client or a stakeholder. You want that documented so that the other people know when their input is expected. Trust me, it's going to save you a lot of heartache. The second thing you need to document is the project management plan. Now, if you are a market research department of one, that's going to be pretty simple. There's only going to be one person, you, who's responsible for all phases of the research. However, in many cases, there are multiple people involved. There might be certain people who are involved in the instrument development. There might be somebody else who's involved in programming. There might be somebody who's specifically involved in doing the data analysis. There might be a group of people who are involved in reporting and data visualization. There can be multiple people involved. And so you want to be really clear to document who's responsible for what on this project. Again, it will save you a lot of heartache about crossed wires later. So this is really a good preemptive strike for you. Then you need the sampling plan. What decisions have been made about who the target population of interest is for this specific study? Is this a general consumer study? Is it a highly niche B2B study? You need to make sure that everybody has agreement about what the definition of the target population is. If we take a consumer research example and we think about, okay, maybe we want to do research with working moms about kitchen appliances, hypothetically. Well, you're going to want to specify what your sample size goal is for that and what types of quotas or screeners you're going to want. For example, how are you going to define working mom? Does that have to be working full-time, working part-time? Maybe you want to have a quota. Maybe you want to have a quota so that you've got half of them are working at least 20 hours a week and half of them are working full-time. So all of those decisions about how you're going to define the population of interest and also where you're going to get them from as research participants, your sampling frame, that might be a phrase some of you are familiar with, that has to be documented. Again, this is one of those things that if you don't document, it's really easy for people to make mistakes or misassumptions about. I've even seen cases where people who were on the same project had different assumptions about the geography. Is this a US only study? Are we just sampling the US population of working moms? Or is this a multinational study? You want this all documented in your sampling plan. And then the fourth aspect that needs to be documented is the data analysis plan. And this is a document where you're basically saying, what are the variables that are going to be most important to meet the objectives of the project? And also what types of data analysis you plan to do when you come out of data collection. So you've got your data in hand. Now what? Are you just going to be running frequency distributions? Are you going to be creating banner tables? Are you going to be doing any kind of multivariate data analysis? Are you going to be using weighting? Are you going to be using any data reduction techniques, et cetera, et cetera? You want to have all of that documented, again, right after the kickoff meeting so that there's no misunderstandings throughout the course of your project. The other thing is by documenting all four types of things right after the kickoff meeting, this is also going to prepare you for success in the questionnaire design process. If you don't have absolute clarity and buy-in to what's going on in terms of the sampling and the data analysis plan, you are likely to get into an onerous number of questionnaire drafts before you get to questionnaire approval. And we want to avoid that. So after you get all those documents done and everybody agrees that they're finalized and they've been approved, now you can proceed to questionnaire design. And questionnaire design will always be an iterative process. You will never design a questionnaire and the first draft of it you send to your colleagues or clients or stakeholders and they all say, fantastic job, this is it. There's always going to be feedback. There's always going to be opportunities to improve. But again, if you've done a good job of everybody agreeing on the sampling plan and the data analysis plan, you're going to be close. However, you should expect 2 to 3 iterations for most professional research projects at minimum. And by the way, it's not uncommon to have that process to go much further. I've certainly been on my fair share of projects where we had more like 10 or 12 iterations before we got to questionnaire approval. After the questionnaire is approved, then you have to go into programming. And that's going to apply, whether you're doing telephone data collection or online data collection. And programming is a step. It is a very specific step. In some survey research projects, it can be quite an onerous step. Sometimes you have very elaborate programming logic that has to not only be programmed, but then tested thoroughly so that you can really be sure when you start data collection that you're going to be collecting the right variables from the right people. So you do need to make sure that you're allocating time in your schedule for programming and testing. Testing may not apply as much if you are doing a paper-based survey. But if you're doing telephone, online data collection, some sort of app-based data collection, then you are going to want to test it. If you're doing a paper survey, then you just need probably a good proofreader, right? After it is programmed, though, then you actually go into pre-testing and data collection. So pre-testing is different than the testing that you just did in the programming phase. In the programming phase, you're testing for technical accuracy to make sure that you did everything correct. When you go into pre-test, at that point, you're actually completing some of your survey responses from people from your target population of interest. So you want to make sure that you're collecting a small number of records actually from people who represent the population that you will be doing the full data collection with. And this is really important because you want to make sure that those people are following your instructions, that they are answering your open-ended questions as you would have expected or in a reasonable way, or that they're not all dropping out because your questionnaire is too long. There are a lot of reasons why you want to make sure that you do an actual pre-test with actual people from your population of interest. Don't just send your survey to Aunt Edna and Uncle George and ask them to take the survey for you and give feedback. Well, they might have some really good feedback. Unless they're part of your target population, it's not really truly a pretest. After you do your pretest, you are going to need some time to review the results and make modifications as needed. And then you can go into full data collection. Now, the amount of time you're going to spend in data collection can vary widely and wildly, depending on what type of research you're doing. If you're doing consumer or B2B, are you doing one country, multiple countries? Are you doing research that is going to have to be done in phases? That is, you're not going to do all of the data collection at once. You're going to do one phase of data collection, review the results, and then go to the next phase of data collection. So there can be a lot of things that are going on that can affect the data collection time period. But when you do get through you are in the data collection process. In a lot of cases, it's going to be 1 day to 5 or more days to do data collection. Again, there are definitely cases where it can be far more than 5 days to do data collection. But during that data collection time, we often want to use that to catch up on a couple of other tasks. So while we're doing data collection, while we are in the field, as we like to say, one thing is we start preparing the deliverables. It's a good time to jumpstart getting that report template put together, making sure that we've got some of the early sections of the report can be roughed out. And while we don't have our data yet, so we can't really do any writing or a lot of chart creation, we can probably get some basics in. Especially if you had a phase 1 that preceded your survey research, you can start summarizing some of that, or if there was some relevant secondary research that you want to have maybe in an appendix, some of those things you can really get started on so that when you do come out of data collection, you can focus on really analyzing and writing up the results. The other thing you can do as you are in data collection is you can update your data analysis plan. So remember I said that it's important to say what kind of data analysis you're going to do. Now that you're in the field and you're starting to see the data come in, you may actually see things in the data that make you want to update your data analysis plan. For example, in our hypothetical case, maybe we were seeing way more variations than we expected by geography, or maybe we are seeing way more variations by age or how many kids were in the household or something else. We might say, you know what, we weren't originally planning on looking at the data this way, but now let's take a closer look at that. And maybe we even want to create some new variables, or maybe we're going to want to run some different types of crosstabs, or maybe we want to look at some variables we weren't expecting to and some predictive analysis. So as you look through your data, you might start to come up with hypotheses and ideas that may have implications for how you're going to want to analyze the data when you've got all of your data collected. When data collection is done, it's done, you're out of the field, then you're going to jump right into analysis. You're going to clean your data, you're going to start analyzing it, you're going to start creating charts and graphs, and you're going to start synthesizing all of that great stuff. Now there's really a lot of steps within that bucket, right? So analysis, charts, synthesis, it's really a lot going on in there. But at a high level, what we're talking about is coming out of data collection and really doing everything you need so that you can start writing a research report. And after you do your data cleaning and your statistical analysis and you're creating your charts, then you can start really working on your deliverables. What is that report going to be? What kind of data output are you going to share with your client? And making sure that it's going to be formatted correctly, and again, at a professional level. Creating your deliverables is also an iterative process, just like questionnaire design. Many clients and stakeholders expect it to be a collaborative process these days. They want to share their expertise. They are subject matter experts very often and can be very helpful in terms of contributing to the interpretation of the data. And so this is a great opportunity for you as the researcher to work collaboratively with clients or stakeholders or other subject matter experts to get input on how you're interpreting the data. And that will often lead to additional analysis. It's not uncommon to deliver, say, a first draft of a report to somebody you're collaborating with, and for them to come back and say, hey, now that I'm looking at the data this way, can you also run this additional piece of analysis? Or informed by what I see here, now I have an idea that these other variables that we weren't really looking at too closely might actually be a bigger part of the story. Can we look at that data in another way? And so they might be asking for additional banner tables, or they might be asking you to use different variables in your in a regression or some sort of tree analysis you might be using. So it's a great opportunity to collaborate with other people, but it does add time to your schedule. So these days, people do expect a collaborative experience on the report, and it's not uncommon to go through 2 or 3 drafts of a report before it's considered final. Once you deliver your report to your client, and for some of you, your client might be an internal stakeholder or might be an external client, then you need to do your follow-up. We never just deliver a report and walk away. There's always going to be questions, additional requests, things that the recipient might want clarified. They may have other ideas about some of the data visualizations. They may have other types of requests. And so that's part of delivering the research, is making sure you're really listening to those requests and doing what you can to make sure that the research is being delivered in a way that's going to fully meet their needs. So we always expect some follow-on. However, after that follow-on is complete, at some point we have to conclude the project. And it's always a good idea to have a clear conclusion. Otherwise, you can run into the never-ending project, which nobody wants. It's not good for anybody. At some point, the project has to be done. Now, there could still be requests, maybe 2 months down the road. They come back and say, hey, I was thinking about that data and I have another question. That's great. But we have to end the project at some point. And so we want to have a definitive point of closing the project. And personally, I like to celebrate. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to send a case of champagne out to everybody I was collaborating with on the project, but I want to have congratulations. I want to thank everybody for their input, whether their input was operational or through their subject matter expertise. But I really want to make sure that I'm thanking people and that I'm creating a moment where it's clear that this is the end of the project and we are celebrating the conclusion. Now, obviously, the process I just gave you is a very high-level process. Within each of these steps that I talked about, in some cases, there are another 10 or 20 steps that go into it. But for people who may be newer to the market research and insights profession, hopefully this gives you an idea of what's involved in managing a survey research project from start to finish. And of course, we cover some of this in greater detail at some of the courses at Research Rockstar. So in our course on quantitative data analysis, we get a little bit more into how we get into actually doing the data analysis. In our course on writing research reports, obviously, we get into all the steps to actually create a client-ready research report. And our class on client management skills really has tips for managing clients, how to set and manage their expectations throughout the process from start to finish. If you have any questions, certainly do let me know.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. Make sure you never miss a new one by clicking the subscribe button now.